Emily sat at the long dining table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the silver cutlery shining under the warm glow of the chandelier. The clinking of glasses and the scrape of forks against china filled the air, but underneath it all was something heavier, words that cut sharper than any knife. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her pearls catching the light. "Honestly, Daniel, I don't know how you manage," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "Most men would have chosen a wife who actually contributes to the family instead of, well, just another mouth to feed." Richard chuckled lowly, sipping his wine. "She's been with you for years, and what has she done? Nothing. No career, no family money, no connections. Just useless." Emily's cheeks burned, but she kept her smile fixed, her eyes lowering to the plate in front of her. She cut into her food slowly, chewing even slower, willing herself not to react. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Beside her, Daniel cleared his throat but said nothing. He didn't defend her. He didn't even glance at her. He simply kept eating, as if the conversation didn't exist. Margaret went on, her tone sweet but sharp. "You know, Richard, when I look at our family, I see such accomplishments. Our daughter married into old money, our nephews run businesses, even the cousins abroad are thriving. But here," she waved her hand toward Emily, her diamond ring flashing. "Well, let's just say, not everyone meets the family standard." The table erupted in polite laughter. Everyone except Emily. She pressed her lips together, holding back the storm that wanted to escape her. Instead, she forced her face to remain calm, her smile thin but present. It was easier this way. Let them laugh. Let them think they knew her. Her fingers curled under the table, nails digging into her palm. She thought to herself, if only they knew the truth. If only they knew who I really was. Margaret continued her boasting, her voice dripping with pride. "Did I tell you all? Our family name was mentioned again in the papers last week. Our influence is growing. Richard and I always knew how to build something lasting. That's what makes a person valuable, isn't it? Their ability to create wealth, to make their name matter." Emily lifted her glass of water, her hand steady despite the fire building inside her. She took a sip, hiding the faintest smile tugging at her lips. Wealth, value, a name that matters. She let the words sink in, not just in the room, but deep inside her, because she knew something none of them did. And soon they would see. Very soon, the same people calling her useless would be forced to eat their words. For now, she stayed quiet, playing her part at the table, letting them think they had won. But inside, she carried a secret strong enough to turn this entire family upside down. And that thought alone kept her calm, almost serene, as Margaret's laughter rang through the night. Emily was raised by a single mother in a small apartment on the edge of town. Life was never easy, but her mother taught her to work hard and never give up, no matter how little they had. As a teenager, Emily worked after school in a grocery store, and on weekends she cleaned houses with her mother. There were days she came home exhausted, her hands sore, her back aching, but she never complained. She knew her mother was doing even more, and she wanted to help in any way she could. When she met Daniel, she thought her life was finally changing. He was charming, full of big dreams, and unlike anyone she had ever known. At first he adored her. He would bring her flowers, hold her hand in public, and tell her she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He didn't care that she didn't come from money. He said he loved her heart, her kindness, her strength. Emily believed him. She thought their love was enough. But years passed, and love turned into something colder. Bills piled up. Daniel's career didn't take off the way he promised, and Emily worked even harder to make ends meet. She took part-time jobs, stretched their money, and tried to keep their home running. The man who once told her she was his world began to look at her with disappointment, as if her lack of wealth was her fault. His adoration faded into tolerance, and tolerance slipped into silence. Daniel's parents had never wanted him to marry her. Margaret, his mother, was clear from the beginning. Emily wasn't their kind of people. They had hoped Daniel would marry someone from a wealthy family, someone who could lift their name even higher. Instead, he chose Emily, the girl with no money, no status, no connections. To Margaret and Richard, Emily was nothing more than a mistake Daniel made when he was young and foolish. They never let her forget it. At family gatherings, they would make sly comments, each one like a small knife. Some women bring fortune into a marriage, Margaret once said, smiling as if it was a harmless joke. Others, well, they bring very little. Richard wasn't much kinder, often asking Daniel in front of her, "Are you sure this is the life you want, son?" What they didn't know was that Emily hadn't given up on herself, even if they all thought she had. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Daniel had gone to bed, Emily worked on her laptop. She poured her time into an idea she believed could change her future, a startup in the tech finance world. Nobody in the family understood it. Daniel rolled his eyes when he saw her typing late at night. His parents dismissed it as a hobby to keep her busy. To them, it was just another sign that she was unambitious, lost, and dependent. But Emily knew better. She had spent months studying, learning, and slowly building something out of nothing. Every line of code, every plan she drafted was a step toward freedom. She didn't talk about it at the dinner table. She didn't argue when Margaret called her a burden. She stayed quiet, working in the shadows, dreaming of the day her effort would mean something. There were nights when she cried softly into her pillow, the weight of rejection pressing down on her. Being invisible in her own marriage, being treated as if she didn't matter, hurt more than words could explain. And yet, in the quiet of those moments, she promised herself she wouldn't break. She wouldn't let their cruelty define her. Emily carried herself with quiet resilience. At gatherings, when she was mocked, she smiled politely. When Daniel dismissed her work, she nodded and kept typing once he left the room. She endured the humiliation. Not because she was weak, but because she knew her worth would one day speak louder than their insults. Inside, she held on to her dream. She told herself that even if no one believed in her, she would keep moving forward. She had survived worse. The long nights of working 2 jobs as a teenager, the exhaustion of living with less, the struggle of proving herself every single day. What was a few more years of being underestimated? Every insult became fuel. Every moment of loneliness gave her strength. And though they couldn't see it, though they refused to believe it, Emily was building something powerful. Something that would one day change not just her life, but theirs too. For now, she carried the weight in silence, her secret work hidden behind tired eyes and forced smiles. But deep inside, she was waiting for the moment when the girl they called useless would finally show them who she really was. Emily's startup finally caught the attention she had been dreaming of. After months of long nights, endless research, and moments of doubt, an email appeared in her inbox. A group of major investors wanted to meet her. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Why would they be interested in her little project, something everyone had laughed at? But when she walked into that meeting, laptop in hand, and presented her idea, their faces told her everything. They didn't see a useless woman. They saw potential. They saw value. Within weeks, contracts were drawn up. Emily signed her name on the dotted line, her hands trembling with excitement. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was independent. The deal gave her more financial security than she had ever known. She could pay her own bills, support herself without Daniel, and stand tall. She wanted to scream with joy, to call her mother and tell her everything. But she stayed quiet. She knew timing mattered. The very same day she signed the papers, she had to attend Margaret's birthday dinner. The whole family was gathered in a grand dining hall, crystal glasses lined neatly on the table, servants moving quietly in the background. Emily arrived in a simple dress, her smile polite as always. No one there knew that the woman they dismissed as unambitious had just become the most financially stable person in the room. The evening began pleasantly enough, but Margaret never could resist a chance to remind Emily of her place. As the main course was being served, she lifted her glass and said with a laugh, "I must say, Daniel, it's impressive you've managed so well all these years. Most men would have realized by now that carrying dead weight drags you down." The room fell silent for a moment before laughter erupted. Emily's stomach twisted. Dead weight. That was what she was to them. She glanced at Daniel, hoping, just hoping, for him to say something, to defend her, to remind his mother that words could wound. But Daniel stayed quiet. He looked down at his plate, cutting his food as if nothing had happened. The silence between them hurt more than Margaret's insult. It was one thing to be mocked by his parents. It was another to realize her husband no longer cared enough to stand beside her. Emily lowered her eyes, hiding the pain behind a calm mask. She felt every stare in the room pressing down on her, waiting for her to break, to cry, to defend herself. But she didn't. She simply smiled faintly, lifted her fork, and took another bite of food. Inside, though, something shifted. For years she had swallowed their insults, told herself it didn't matter, told herself one day she would prove them wrong. Now she no longer had to dream of that day. It was here. She had the power, the independence, the means to walk away if she wanted. And yet she chose silence. Because silence was stronger than anger. Silence was patience. Silence meant she was waiting for the perfect moment. Margaret went on with her stories, boasting about her family's successes, her voice filled with pride. The rest of the table followed her lead, ignoring Emily as if she were invisible. But Emily didn't care anymore. Every word, every laugh rolled off her like water. Because she knew something they didn't. They thought she was a burden. They thought she was powerless. But in reality, she had just secured her future in a way none of them could imagine. She sat through the evening, her back straight, her face calm, her heart steady. No one noticed the quiet smile that played at the corner of her lips. Emily no longer needed their approval. She no longer needed Daniel's defense. She had her own strength now, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the day she would finally let them see who she had become. That night, as she walked out of the grand dining hall, her mind was clear. She wasn't broken. She wasn't beaten. She was ready. For the first time in her life, Emily held the power to rewrite her story. And she would, on her own terms. Emily grew in confidence quietly, working late into the night while the rest of the house slept. The soft glow of her laptop lit her determined face as she sent emails, made calls, and built her company's image one step at a time. No one in her family understood what she was doing. To them, she was still the same useless woman who couldn't manage a household, let alone a business. But Emily didn't care. Every small success, every investor's reply, every tiny step forward made her feel stronger, more capable, more alive. Daniel, on the other hand, was growing distant. Once he had adored her, but now he looked at her with impatience and even resentment. "Why do you waste so much time on that silly project?" he asked one evening, his voice sharp. "We have bills to pay. You should be focusing on us, not some dream that will probably go nowhere." Emily simply nodded, keeping her voice calm. "I'm helping our future, Daniel," she said quietly. But he didn't understand. He never did. Margaret, true to form, continued her cruel remarks whenever she got a chance. "One day, Daniel will wake up and realize he married beneath him," she said to anyone who would listen, smiling as if she had delivered a clever joke. Emily would bite her tongue, forcing herself to smile politely, though each word stung like a thorn. Behind the scenes, Emily quietly became the financial backbone of the household. Bills were paid on time, groceries kept stocked, and unexpected expenses managed without anyone noticing. Daniel had no idea that Emily was the one covering some of the largest costs, his ignorance making the work feel invisible. But Emily didn't mind. She had long ago stopped doing things for recognition. This was her life, her responsibility, and she took it seriously. Richard, her father-in-law, began to notice small changes. He saw the way Emily stayed calm during tense family conversations, how she answered Margaret's jabs with quiet dignity instead of anger. He noticed how she handled household problems efficiently, never complaining. Something about her strength was different from before. He didn't understand it yet, but he felt it. As Emily worked late nights and built her company, the cracks in her marriage grew wider. Daniel spent more time away from home, more time distracted, and more time frustrated. Eventually, his anger found a new outlet. Emily discovered one evening, almost by accident, that he was seeing another woman. Someone from a wealthy family, someone who fit perfectly into the world his parents had always wanted for him. The discovery hit Emily like a punch to the stomach, but she didn't scream or cry. She didn't confront him in anger. Instead, she made a decision. She would not let this betrayal shake her. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Every tear, every insult, every moment of neglect had made her stronger, and she would use that strength now. Emily planned her next moves with icy precision. She continued working, continuing to grow her business, continuing to secure her future. Every time Daniel tried to pull her back into arguments, Every time Margaret tried to cut her down, she remained calm, collected, untouchable. Loneliness wrapped around her at times, and there were moments she felt the sting of betrayal deeply, but she kept moving forward. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their love. What she needed was herself, and she was finally enough. Every insult, every disregard from Daniel or his family had fueled her silent transformation. Where once she had been small, unseen, and undervalued, now she was building power and independence. The woman they thought they could control, the woman they thought they could mock, was quietly becoming unstoppable. Emily's nights were long, but they were hers. Her days were filled with patience and careful observation, watching Daniel spiral into his own mistakes, watching her in-laws continue their arrogance without realizing the storm brewing quietly beneath the surface. The tension grew heavier with every passing day. Emily felt the weight of betrayal and isolation, but she also felt the rising thrill of anticipation. She knew the time would come when everything would change, when Daniel, Margaret, and Richard would see the truth, not as a theory, not as a rumor, but as a reality she had built with her own hands. And when that day came, Emily would be ready. Not angry, not vengeful, just calm, confident, and in complete control of her life and her story. Margaret and Richard were sitting in their grand living room, papers scattered across the polished table. The tension between them was thick. "If we don't act fast, the company could collapse," Richard said, running a hand through his hair. "The investors are losing patience, and we might not survive the next quarter." Margaret scoffed, though her voice held a nervous edge. "We can handle it, but really some people are just hopeless. I mean, look at Emily. She thinks she knows anything about money or business." She laughed, shaking her head. She couldn't manage a simple dinner party, let alone a company. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mom, Dad, maybe you shouldn't." But they ignored him, continuing their mockery. Margaret leaned back, her tone cruelly amused. "Honestly, Daniel, you married someone who doesn't belong in this world. It's only a matter of time before you realize it." Emily sat quietly across the table, her hands folded in her lap. She had arrived at the family gathering knowing what she had built, but keeping it hidden until the perfect moment. She listened as they spoke, pretending to be small, pretending to be powerless, while inside, her heart beat with calm confidence. Richard slammed a hand on the table, frustrated. "I don't know how we'll survive this quarter. Maybe we'll need a loan, or ugh, maybe it's hopeless." Margaret snorted. "Someone like Emily could never help. She's clueless. No experience, no money, no brains for business." Emily's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. She had waited for this moment for years. Years of being mocked, dismissed, and belittled. Years of swallowing insults and hiding her work. And now, she held the power to turn the table completely. Suddenly, she reached into her bag and pulled out a crisp envelope. She placed it carefully on the table in front of them. The room went quiet as everyone looked at her, confused. "What's that?" Margaret asked, her voice sharp with curiosity and suspicion. Emily kept her tone calm and steady. "Open it." Daniel frowned. "Emily, what is?" "Open it," she repeated, her eyes locked on Richard and Margaret. Slowly, Richard picked up the envelope and tore it open. Inside were the signed investment checks from Emily's company. At the top of each check, her name shone in bold, CEO Emily Carter. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face went pale. Richard's jaw dropped. Daniel stared, unable to find words. For years, they had called her useless, dismissed her efforts, and mocked her ambition. And now, the woman they had belittled was wealthier, more powerful, and more influential than any of them could imagine. Margaret's voice wavered as she tried to regain composure. "Emily, perhaps you could." Emily cut her off, her tone firm and unshakable. "No. I didn't build this for you. I didn't work every late night, every weekend, every sacrifice, to save your pride. I built this for me, for my future, for the years I was invisible in this family, for the times I was called dead weight, for every insult I endured in silence." Daniel looked down, ashamed. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his chair. "Emily, You did nothing, Daniel," Emily said, her voice steady. "You stood by silently while I was humiliated, while your parents mocked me at every opportunity. You never defended me. You never believed in me. And now, I don't need you to." Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for one of the checks. Emily, please, maybe you could help us? Just this once? We're in trouble. Emily shook her head. No. I am done helping those who never believed in me, who never respected me. You had years to acknowledge me, to treat me as an equal. You chose to belittle me instead. That choice has consequences. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. He realized, too late, that the girl he thought was powerless had built an empire behind his back. Every insult, every sneer he had thrown at her now seemed painfully foolish. Emily's eyes met Daniel's, and she saw the shame and regret there. But she felt no mercy. Her anger had been replaced by calm strength. I am not the same girl you thought you knew, she said softly but clearly. I am stronger. I am capable. And I will not beg for acceptance or approval from anyone who doubted me. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of paper as the envelope remained on the table. Evidence of her journey and triumph. Emily stood up slowly, her posture tall and unyielding. I suggest you take a moment to understand what this means. I built my future. I am in control now. And nothing you say or do can change that. Margaret's face contorted with shock and humiliation. Daniel's mouth opened and closed without forming a sound. Richard's usual confidence had vanished, replaced by disbelief. For the first time, Emily felt completely seen. Not as the useless girl, but as a woman who had fought, endured, and won. No one moved to stop her as she walked to the door. The air was thick with tension, a mix of fear, shame, and awe. Emily had finally spoken her truth, and the weight of years of disrespect lifted from her shoulders. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she didn't demand their love. She simply claimed her power, her independence, and her dignity. As she stepped out of the room, she glanced back once, her eyes steady. I am done waiting. I am done asking for your approval. I am done being invisible. From now on, my life is mine. And with that, Emily left, leaving a stunned family to confront the reality they had never imagined. The girl they mocked was now the one in control. Emily moved out quietly, taking only what she needed. She left Daniel to face the wreckage of his choices. The betrayal, the lies, and the humiliation that now hung over him like a heavy cloud. Margaret and Richard watched her leave, their pride bruised, their assumptions shattered. For years they had mocked her, dismissed her, and treated her as if she were nothing. Now they were forced to confront the reality that Emily was powerful, independent, and completely in control of her life. The first few days in her new apartment were strange but liberating. Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She decorated the space herself, choosing colors and furniture that reflected her personality, her tastes, and her freedom. Every little decision reminded her that she was no longer living under someone else's expectations. She was building a life for herself, on her own terms. Emily invested time and energy into her company, working with people who respected her vision and her dedication. She surrounded herself with colleagues who celebrated her ideas and encouraged her growth, not people who belittled her. Every successful meeting, every project completed, every new partnership felt like a small victory, proof that she could stand on her own without anyone's approval. For the first time, she felt free. Free from judgment, free from mockery, free from the feeling that she needed to justify her worth to anyone. She discovered that independence was not just about money, it was about confidence, about knowing that her value came from her own actions and her own choices. Margaret and Richard attempted to reconnect with her, sending messages, gifts, even trying to arrange casual visits. Emily listened politely, but she had learned the hard way that respect could not be demanded, only earned. She replied calmly, I appreciate the gesture, but respect is earned, not demanded. If you are willing to meet me as an equal, perhaps we can talk. The words were simple, but firm, a clear boundary that they had to understand. Daniel, on the other hand, tried to crawl back into her life. He sent messages filled with regret, called her repeatedly, and even showed up at her apartment unannounced. But Emily met him with calm dignity. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she didn't allow him to manipulate her emotions. Daniel, she said once, standing tall, I am no longer the person you can take for granted. I am not here to fix your mistakes or beg for your attention. My life is mine now. He looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and desperation, but Emily didn't falter. She had spent too many years waiting for others to see her value. Now she knew it herself. In the weeks that followed, Emily's confidence grew even more. She traveled for work, attended conferences, and made decisions that shaped her company's future. She celebrated her successes privately at first, savoring the joy that came from her own effort. Later, she began to share her story with friends and colleagues, not to boast, but to show what persistence and self-belief could achieve. Emily also reconnected with her mother, the woman who had believed in her from the very beginning. Their relationship deepened, filled with gratitude, love, and mutual respect. She realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about support, trust, and respect. She could choose who she wanted in her life, and she chose those who lifted her rather than tore her down. Over time, Margaret and Richard began to understand the consequences of their behavior. They saw Emily's success, her poise, and her independence. But Emily did not let them back in easily. She had learned that boundaries were necessary for her peace and self-respect. Any attempt to reconnect had to be met with equal respect, or it would fail. Daniel, once arrogant and dismissive, slowly faded from her life. She felt no sadness for the relationship that had held her back. Instead, she felt relief. Relief that she could finally live without compromise, without fear of judgment, without feeling invisible. Emily had reclaimed more than just her financial independence. She had reclaimed her identity, her confidence, and her right to define her own life. She had proven to herself, and quietly, to those who had doubted her, that her worth was never dependent on someone else's approval. Sitting in her new apartment one evening, Emily looked around and smiled. She had come a long way from the girl who had been called useless, ignored, and mocked. Every decision, every sacrifice, every late night had brought her here. She felt strong, capable, and free. Her journey had been painful, but it had led to empowerment. She no longer needed validation from Daniel, his parents, or anyone else. She was enough. She was successful. She was finally at peace with herself. Emily had taken control of her life, and in doing so, she had shown that true strength comes not from revenge, but from self-respect, independence, and the courage to follow one's own path. Emily visited her mother on a bright, quiet morning. The small house smelled of fresh bread and warm sunlight streamed through the windows. Her mother was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea, as if she had known Emily would come today. Her mother looked up and smiled, her eyes lighting up. "Emily, it's so good to see you." Emily returned the smile, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She set down a small envelope on the table and gently placed it in her mother's hands. "I want you to have this," she said softly. Her mother's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a signed check from Emily's company, but it wasn't about money or showing off. It was gratitude. For all the years her mother had believed in her, encouraged her, and lifted her up when the world told her she wasn't enough. Her mother looked up, eyes misty. "Emily, I don't know what to say. You've done so much. I've always believed in you, but seeing this, it's more than I imagined." Emily shook her head gently, tears of relief threatening to fall, but holding back with a calm smile. "You never needed to imagine, Mom. You just knew. You knew I could do it, even when no one else did. They called me useless, but you always believed. That's all that ever mattered." Her mother reached across the table, taking Emily's hands in hers. "You've grown into such a strong, amazing woman. I'm proud of you, Emily. So proud." Emily felt a deep peace settle over her. The long years of pain, humiliation, and struggle seemed to melt away in that moment. She didn't feel the need for revenge or to prove herself to anyone else. She had already proven it, to herself, to her mother, and quietly to the world. "I'm finally free, Mom," she whispered, almost to herself. "Free from their judgment, free from waiting for approval, free from feeling small. I finally know my own worth." Her mother squeezed her hands gently. "And you've earned it. Every bit of it." Emily smiled, feeling a calm joy she had never known before. For the first time, she could simply breathe, without worry, without fear, without the weight of others' expectations. She had worked hard, endured more than she thought she could, and had emerged stronger. They sat together in comfortable silence, sipping tea, letting the quiet morning wrap around them. The world outside still existed, with all its challenges and judgments, but inside this small kitchen, Emily felt victory. not as a shout or a show, but as the quiet strength of self-respect and liberation. She leaned back in her chair, looking at her mother, and whispered again, a soft smile on her lips. They called me useless, but you always knew better. And for the first time in her life, Emily truly believed it. The sun streamed through the window, warm and steady, and the house was filled with a simple, profound peace. Emily's journey had ended not with revenge, but with freedom, dignity, and a deep, unshakable sense of self. She had won, quietly, completely, and on her own terms. Hey besties! Thanks so much for watching till the end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. See you next time.